Hey everyone, it's Kenji. Olivia Erlkksson wrote in from Sweden asking me how to tell when beef is done braising, how to make sure that it's tender, not overcooked, not tough, not dry. When I was younger, I thought that if beef cooks for 3 to 4 hours and is tender and moist, then surely, cooking it for 6 or 7 hours or 12 hours would make it even more tender and moist. Obviously, this is not the case if you've ever over braised beef. It becomes kind of pulpy and dry and not very good to eat. So to answer this question, I want to first start by looking at the structure of beef, the overall structure of beef, and then we'll talk about how it breaks down, all right? So this is a hanger steak. I'm using a hanger steak, which is not typically a braising cut, but I'm using this because it has a really clear muscle structure and you can really see how it works. So it's made up of, meat is made up of a few different parts. So there's obviously the muscle, the red stuff. There's connective tissue, which is these sort of sheaths here, and the stuff that's in between these sort of larger muscle structures. And then there's fat, which is the sort of, waxy, pasty white stuff that is comes in large swaths. It might also come in little bits of intramuscular fat like this. So your goal when braising is to break down that connective tissue and start to render the fat, but not to dry out the muscle. So muscles, they're made up of individual fibrils. Those fibrils are made up of proteins called actin and myosin, and those are bundled up into muscle fibers, which are what you see here. Each one of those fibers is wrapped in a sheath of connective tissue. And so when you're cooking beef, it undergoes a few distinct phases. So this is beef chuck that has been cooked, braised for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, not very long. At this stage, it's still pretty tough. You can't really cut it with a fork. And in fact, beef, as you start to braise it, is going to continue to get tougher and tougher for that first hour and a half or so. Not much connective tissue breaking down. This is a piece of beef chuck that has been braised for around 2.5 hours. So at this stage, you can see the larger swaths of fat very easily separate. The fat is rendered, that larger swaths of connective tissue very easily separate. And then with a little bit more pressure, you can pretty easily break into the actual muscle of the meat, you see? Separates easily. This is the phase that I would look for when I'm making something like a beef stew or braised short ribs. It's what I call primary breakdown, when the larger swaths of connective tissue and fat have rendered. Now this is beef that has been braising for about 3.5 to 4 hours. This one you can see it shreds apart pretty easily along not just its seams, but along the actual individual muscle fibers. This is what I call secondary breakdown, once the fibers start separating. And this is the texture I look for when I'm making something like barbacoa or ropa vieja, a Cuban stew. And then finally, this here is beef that has been braising for about 8 hours. And you can see not only does it separate along individual muscle fibers, but those actual individual muscle fibers start to fully break down as well. It's almost kind of like a pulp, a mash. And when you eat this, it tastes really, really dry and chalky. So this is overcooked beef. These timings, by the way, are for beef chuck cooked inside a Dutch oven, braised in a Dutch oven that I had set inside a 275 degree Fahrenheit oven. So about 135 degrees Celsius. If you do it a little bit hotter, 300 degrees, 325 degrees, it'll go a little bit faster. If you do it cooler, 225, 250 degrees, it'll go a little bit slower. The amount of fat and connective tissue in the meat also makes a difference. So this was for beef chuck. For something with even more connective tissue, like a short rib, you might need to add on about half an hour to that time, or even an hour in some cases. Things like oxtail might need an extra hour. For leaner cuts, like say flank steak or flat meat, things like that, you might need to take half an hour off those times. But really the best way is don't use a timer, use your sense of touch. So starting at around the 2 to 2.5 hour mark, check your meat every half hour or so. And once it's at the point that you like it, stop. If it's still too tough, let it keep going longer. And don't think that just going longer and longer and longer is going to make it more tender and moist, because there is a limit to it. And once you get past that limit, it's going to start drying out. All right, I hope that was useful. If you want more details on any of this, you can find them in my newest Ask Kenji column in New York Times Cooking. And if you got more questions, make sure to send them my way and I will do my best to test and answer them. All right, bye-bye.